Michael stood in the doorway and his mouth dropped open because he couldn't believe what he was seeing right in front of him. His daughter, the little girl who hadn't eaten any food for 2 whole weeks, was chewing something. He quickly covered his mouth with both hands as tears started pouring down his face like a waterfall, and all he could think about was how this was actually happening right now because Michael Parker had lost his wife Emily 6 months ago when she died in a terrible car crash with no warning at all. She was just gone forever, and their 3-year-old daughter Lily didn't really understand what death meant. She just knew that her mommy wasn't coming back home ever again, and something deep inside her heart broke into a million pieces. She stopped talking to anyone, stopped playing with her toys, stopped smiling her beautiful smile, and 2 weeks ago she stopped eating any food at all. Michael hired the very best doctors in the whole country, special child doctors who study feelings, feeding experts, people who had spent their entire careers helping children with problems. But none of them could reach Lily at all. She just sat there in her room getting thinner and thinner every single day while staring at nothing on the wall. Her father would sit with her for hours and hours begging her to please eat something, promising her anything she wanted in the whole world. But she wouldn't even look at him with her eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez, the kind woman who had helped raise Lily since she was a tiny baby, cried every single time she saw the little girl fading away like a ghost. Michael was a billionaire, which meant he had more money than most people could ever imagine. He could buy anything in the entire world. But he couldn't save his own daughter no matter how hard he tried. Then one morning a new helper arrived at the big house where they lived. Her name was Emma, and she was young and quiet, and came from a neighborhood where people didn't have very much money at all. When Mrs. Rodriguez told Emma all about Lily and what was happening, Emma didn't look shocked or surprised. Instead, she looked like she understood exactly what Lily was feeling, and that's because when Emma was 7 years old her own mother had died too, and she remembered exactly what it felt like to not want to live anymore because the pain was so bad. That afternoon Emma went upstairs to Lily's room, but she didn't try to force her to eat anything. She just sat down with her on the floor and she told Lily about her own mother, about how much it hurts when you miss someone so much that it feels hard to even breathe. Lily's eyes flickered for just 1 second like a tiny light turning on. The next morning Emma made something very simple in the kitchen, just bread with butter and a little bit of salt on top, nothing fancy or expensive. She sat down right next to Lily and started eating it herself without saying a word. Lily watched her very carefully and then, for the first time in 2 whole weeks, she reached out her small hand toward the food. Michael was downstairs working when Mrs. Rodriguez ran into the room, barely able to speak because she was so excited. She kept saying over and over that Lily was eating. Michael didn't believe it at first because it seemed impossible. He ran up the stairs as fast as he could and froze completely still in the doorway. There was his daughter holding a piece of bread in her tiny hand, chewing it slowly while tears streamed down her face, and sitting right beside her was a woman he barely even knew. Before the story continues, you need to know that sometimes God sends help from the very last place you would ever expect to find it. Emma's first morning working in the house started before the sun even came up in the sky. She took the train from her neighborhood on the south side of the city, watching everything wake up through the frosted windows. By the time she reached the tall building downtown, the sky was turning gray over the big lake. Mrs. Rodriguez let her in through the back entrance that the workers used, and the kitchen was bigger than Emma's entire apartment. Everything was shiny and perfect, with stainless steel and granite counters and windows that stretched from the floor all the way to the ceiling. Outside, the lake looked like flat metal under the winter sky. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't say much at first. She just handed Emma an apron and pointed to the cutting board on the counter. She said quietly that breakfast needed to be made first for the little girl. Emma washed her hands carefully and started chopping fruit into small pieces. The knife made soft sounds against the board, and everything else in the house was completely silent. There was no TV playing, no music, no voices, just silence everywhere. After a little while, Mrs. Rodriguez came back carrying a tray, and on it was a small plate of scrambled eggs, toast cut into triangles, and a glass of orange juice. Emma watched her arrange everything so carefully, like she was preparing something very special and important. Emma asked if Lily ever asked for anything special, and Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head sadly and said that Lily doesn't talk anymore at all, not since her mother died. Emma's chest felt tight because she knew that kind of silence, The kind that swallows you up like you're drowning. Mrs. Rodriguez picked up the tray and headed toward the stairs to bring it up to Lily. 15 minutes later, Mrs. Rodriguez came back down the stairs and the tray was completely untouched with all the food still on it. She set it on the counter without saying a word and then walked to the sink and just stood there staring out the window. Emma dried her hands on a towel and asked how long this had been going on. Mrs. Rodriguez said it had been 2 weeks since Lily stopped eating completely, but she had been disappearing for months before that. Emma asked what she meant by disappearing, and Mrs. Rodriguez turned to her with red eyes and said that Emma would see soon enough. Upstairs a door opened and closed and footsteps moved across the floor above them. The steps were slow and heavy. Mrs. Rodriguez whispered that it was Mr. Parker, and that he had been working from home since all this started and he doesn't leave Lily's side for very long. A few minutes later Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was tall and wearing a dark suit even though it was barely 7 o'clock in the morning and his face looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't look at Emma at first. He just poured himself some coffee from the pot and stood by the window staring out at nothing. Emma kept her voice very gentle and said, "Good morning, sir." He glanced over at her like he had forgotten anyone else was even there, and said that she must be the new person they hired. It wasn't really a question. Emma said, "Yes, sir. My name is Emma Morrison." He nodded once and then looked back out the window and asked her how long she thought she would last working here. The words weren't meant to be mean or cruel. They just sounded very tired. Emma looked right at him and said, "As long as Lily needs me to." For just a second something changed in his face. Not hope exactly, but surprise. Then he set down his coffee cup and walked out of the kitchen. Mrs. Rodriguez let out a long breath and said quietly that Michael was a good man, but he didn't know how to fight. Something he couldn't control. Emma looked at the breakfast tray on the counter that nobody had eaten, and she thought about Lily upstairs, about a little girl who had stopped eating because the world stopped making any sense at all. And she thought about her own mother, and about being 7 years old, and not understanding why God would take away someone you loved so much. She whispered under her breath so soft that Mrs. Rodriguez couldn't even hear her. She said, "Please God, I don't know how to do this, but if you brought me here then please don't let me waste it." Upstairs in her room Lily sat on the floor with her knees pulled up to her chest staring at a picture on the wall. In the picture her mother was smiling a big beautiful smile. Lily hadn't smiled in 6 whole months. She didn't know that someone downstairs was praying for her right at that moment, but somewhere deep inside her, in a place she couldn't even name or understand, something stirred just barely, like the very first breath you take before waking up from a long sleep. Emma spent the rest of that morning learning how the house worked. She wiped down counters that were already totally clean, organized cabinets that didn't need organizing at all, kept her hands busy while her mind stayed focused upstairs on Lily. Around 10 o'clock Mrs. Rodriguez brought down another tray that was still completely untouched. Emma looked at the eggs that were now cold and hard, the toast that was dry at the edges, the juice sitting in the glass like it had given up trying. Mrs. Rodriguez scraped everything into the trash without saying a word. Emma watched her and asked what Lily does all day up there. Mrs. Rodriguez said that she just sits in her room and stares at the walls, and sometimes she looks at pictures of her mother. Her voice cracked when she said that's all Lily does. Emma asked if Michael goes up there to see her, and Mrs. Rodriguez said yes. Every few hours he talks to her, and reads to her and begs her to eat. She shook her head and said, but Lily doesn't respond at all. It's like she's not even there anymore. Emma's throat felt tight because she knew that feeling so well, the feeling where you're still breathing but you're not really alive. You're just waiting for the pain to stop or waiting to stop feeling anything at all. She turned back to the sink and started scrubbing a pan that didn't really need scrubbing. She said quietly to God that she didn't know what he wanted her to do here, but please show her the way. Around noon Michael came down to the kitchen again, and he moved like someone carrying weight that no one else could see on their shoulders. His shoulders were tight and his jaw was clenched. He stood at the counter staring at his phone, but Emma could tell he wasn't really reading anything because his eyes weren't moving at all. She set a plate in front of him with a sandwich she had made, nothing fancy, just turkey and cheese on bread. He looked at it like he had forgotten what food even was. Emma said gently that he should eat something, sir. He almost smiled, and said that's what he keeps telling Lily. Emma said it's different when someone reminds you that you're not alone. He looked up at her, then really looked at her for the first time, and said that she had lost someone too. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded and said yes. Her mother when she was 7 years old. She said that she stopped eating too for a while until her grandmother sat with her every single day and reminded her that she was still here for a reason. Michael's eyes filled up with tears and he looked away quickly, but not before Emma saw them. He whispered that he didn't know what to do anymore. He said he had tried everything. Emma's voice was soft but very steady when she said that maybe Lily doesn't need him to fix it. Maybe she just needs him to sit in the pain with her. He stared at Emma for a long moment, and then he picked up the sandwich and took a bite. Not because he was hungry, but because someone had reminded him that he wasn't alone either. Upstairs, Lily pulled her knees even tighter to her chest. She could hear voices down below. They were faint and distant. She used to run downstairs as fast as she could when she heard her father's voice. But now she just stayed still, waiting for what she didn't really know, but somewhere deep inside a part of her was listening. That afternoon the light coming through the windows turned soft and golden. Emma was drying dishes when Mrs. Rodriguez came in with the dinner tray. There was a small bowl of soup, some crackers, and apple slices cut into star shapes. Emma watched her arrange everything perfectly. Then Emma said quietly that she wanted to take the tray up this time. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped and looked at her. She said that wasn't necessary. Emma said she knew, but that she would like to try anyway. Mrs. Rodriguez studied Emma's face for a moment. There was something in Emma's eyes, not being bossy and not pity, just calm. Finally Mrs. Rodriguez nodded and said that if Mr. Parker finds out and gets upset then she couldn't protect Emma. Emma said she understood. She lifted the tray with both hands and the stairs felt longer than they should have. Each step felt heavy. Not from the tray but from what was waiting at the top. The second floor hallway was lined with photographs everywhere. There was Lily as a baby, Lily laughing on a swing, Lily in her mother's arms with both of them smiling like nothing bad could ever happen. Emma's chest hurt looking at them. She stopped outside Lily's door, which was open just a tiny crack. She knocked softly and said, "Lily, my name is Emma and I brought your dinner." There was only silence. She pushed the door open very slowly. The room was painted pale blue and filled with toys that no one had touched in months. Stuffed animals lined up perfectly on shelves, a dollhouse in the corner with everything arranged just right, and on the floor sitting with her back against the bed was Lily. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The little girl looked so small, so fragile, like if you spoke too loud she might just disappear into thin air. Her hair hung loose around her face and her eyes stared at nothing at all. Emma set the tray down on the dresser. Not right in front of Lily and not close to her, just nearby. Then she pulled a chair over but not too close, maybe 5 or 6 feet away. She sat down and for a long time she didn't say anything at all. She just sat there quietly breathing the same air. Minutes passed and the light from the window shifted across the room. Finally Emma spoke and her voice was barely above a whisper. She said, "You know, Lily, you don't have to eat if you don't want to." Lily's eyelashes flickered just barely. Emma kept her voice very soft and said that her grandma used to say that when someone's heart hurts too much, food doesn't taste right anymore. Like everything in your mouth feels wrong, like it doesn't belong there. Lily's head turned just a tiny fraction of an inch. Emma said that she lost her mama when she was 7 years old and after she died Emma didn't want to eat either. Nothing made sense anymore. She kept thinking, why should I eat when my mama can't? There was silence, and then so quiet that Emma almost missed it. Lily whispered, "Did your mama die?" Emma's eyes filled with tears and she said, "Yes, baby, she did." Lily turned her head a little bit more and looked at Emma. Then she whispered that her mama died too. Emma nodded slowly and said, "I know. Mrs. Rodriguez told me. I'm so sorry." Lily stared at her and really looked at her like she was trying to see if Emma was telling the truth. Then Lily asked, "Did it hurt?" Emma didn't lie. She said every single day it hurt. Lily asked, "Does it still hurt now?" Emma said, "Sometimes, but not the same way." She leaned forward just slightly and said, "It gets softer, like it's still there but it doesn't cut as deep anymore." Lily's lips started to tremble and for the first time in 2 whole weeks something in her eyes changed. Not happiness, not relief, just recognition, like she had finally found someone who understood what she was feeling. Lily whispered, "Will you stay?" Emma's voice broke when she said, "As long as you want me to." Outside the door Mrs. Rodriguez stood with both hands pressed to her mouth with tears streaming down her face. and downstairs Michael sat at his desk staring at nothing. He didn't know that upstairs for the first time in months his daughter had spoken actual words. Emma couldn't sleep at all that night. She kept thinking about Lily, about those empty eyes, about the way she had whispered mine too like it was a secret she had been carrying all alone. The next morning Emma arrived at the house before the sun even came up. The city was still dark. With street lights reflecting off empty sidewalks, she let herself into the back entrance and stood in the quiet kitchen thinking about all those meals that nobody had touched, all that expensive food prepared by people who knew about nutrition but didn't know about Lily. Emma opened the big refrigerator and moved past the organic vegetables, the fancy imported cheeses, the carefully labeled containers, and reached for the simple things. White bread, butter, American cheese and plastic. Rap. She heard footsteps behind her and Mrs. Rodriguez stood in the doorway looking surprised. She said, "You're here early." Emma said she couldn't sleep. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at what Emma was holding and asked what she was doing. Emma set the bread on the counter and said that when her grandma was trying to help her after her mama died, she didn't make fancy meals, she made grilled cheese, just butter and bread and cheese, nothing special at all. Mrs. Rodriguez's face got soft, and she said she used to make those for Lily before everything fell apart. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded with her eyes getting wet. Emma turned on the stove and said, "Then maybe that's what Lily needs, not something perfect, just something that feels like home." The butter started to sizzle in the pan. Emma laid the bread down, added the cheese, and let it melt slow. The smell filled the whole kitchen. It was warm and simple and honest. Mrs. Rodriguez wiped her eyes and said that Mr. Parker won't like this. She said there's a meal plan and the nutritionist said what Lily should eat. Emma said she knew what they said but Lily wasn't eating what they planned. So what do we have to lose by trying something different? Footsteps came down the stairs and Michael appeared in the doorway dressed for a run with his hair still damp with sweat. He stopped when he saw the grilled cheese cooking in the pan. He asked, "What is that?" and his voice was tight. Emma said calmly that it was breakfast. Michael said, "That's not on the plan." Emma said she knew. His jaw got tight and he said, "The doctors said Lily needs specific nutrients." Emma turned to face him and said that the doctors said Lily was physically fine but she's not eating what they prescribed. "So with respect, sir, what are we losing by trying something different?" Michael stared at her and part of him wanted to tell her to stop, to follow the rules, to do what the experts said. But another part of him, the desperate father who had watched his daughter fade away for 2 weeks, wanted to believe that anything might work. He said quietly that if this doesn't work then Emma would be done here. Emma looked right at him and said, "And if it does?" He didn't answer, he just turned and walked out. Mrs. Rodriguez let out a shaky breath and said that Emma was either very brave or very foolish. Emma cut the sandwich into small triangles and said maybe both. She placed them on a plain white plate with no garnish, no fancy presentation, just food, real food. The kind that tasted like love. Emma said she was taking this up to Lily and Mrs. Rodriguez nodded slowly and said that Michael would be watching. Emma said she knew. She lifted the plate with both hands and her heart was pounding as she climbed the stairs, not from fear of losing her job but from hope. She prayed quietly, "Please God, let this mean something." At Lily's door she knocked softly but there was no answer. She pushed it open and Lily was in the same spot as yesterday, on the floor by the bed with her knees pulled up staring at nothing. Emma sat down in the same chair and set the plate between them on the floor, and then she did something that no one expected. She picked up a triangle and took a bite herself. Lily's eyes moved just slightly toward the food. Emma chewed slowly like she had all the time in the world, like there was nowhere else she needed to be. Lily watched her with her eyes following every single movement. The room was so quiet that Emma could hear her own breathing. She swallowed and then set the triangle down on the plate between them. Emma said that her grandma used to say grilled cheese tastes better when you share it with someone you trust. Lily's voice came out barely above a whisper when she said that Mommy made these. Emma's chest got tight and she asked, "Did she?" Lily nodded her head. She said on Sundays after church. Emma smiled and said then she had really good taste. There was silence and Lily stared at the plate. Her small hand lifted up and then dropped back into her lap. Emma didn't push or say just try it or it's good for you or any of the things that adults say when they're trying to fix something. She just sat there, present. Finally Lily spoke again and her voice shook. She asked if she ate it. Would she forget her mommy? Emma's throat closed up and she leaned forward just a little bit. she said. No, baby, eating it means you remember her. Every bite is a memory of Sunday mornings with your mama. Lily's eyes filled with tears and she asked, promise? Emma said, I promise. Lily's hand reached out again, and this time it didn't stop. Her fingers were so small they could barely hold the triangle. She brought it close to her face and smelled it. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Emma whispered that it's okay to cry, Lily. Your mama would want you to remember her this way. Lily opened her mouth and took the tiniest bite. She chewed very slowly with her eyes squeezed shut and tears falling faster now. She swallowed and then something inside her completely shattered. She started sobbing with deep broken sobs that sounded like they had been trapped inside her for months. Emma moved closer and pulled her into her arms. Lily collapsed against her, still holding the grilled cheese in one hand and clutching Emma's shirt with the other. Lily cried out that she missed her mommy. She said, I miss mommy so much. Emma rocked her gently and said, I know, baby, I know you do. Lily kept crying and said, it hurts. Emma said, I know it does. Lily said, it hurts so bad. Emma said, I know, I know. Lily cried and cried with her whole body shaking, and through it all Emma just held her. She didn't tell her to stop crying, didn't tell her it would be okay. She just held her while Lily finally let everything out. In the doorway, Michael stood completely frozen. His hand was over his mouth and tears were pouring down his face. He had just watched his daughter eat for the first time in 2 weeks. But more than that, he had just watched her cry for the first time since the funeral. He had thought the silence was the worst thing that could happen. But now he understood that the silence was Lily drowning. This, the crying, the breaking. This was her coming up for air. He took a step into the room and Lily saw him through her tears. She said, Daddy. He dropped to his knees beside them and his voice was breaking when he said, I'm here, sweetheart. Daddy's here. Lily reached for him with her free hand while still holding the sandwich in the other. He took her hand and kissed it over and over like he was trying to make up for every time he hadn't been able to reach her. Lily whispered, I'm eating, Daddy. Like Mommy wanted. Michael couldn't speak at all. He just nodded with tears streaming down his face. Lily looked at the sandwich, and then back at Emma, and she took another bite, then another. Each one was a choice. Each one was saying, I'm still here. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in the hallway with both hands pressed over her heart, watching the impossible happen. The child who had been disappearing was coming back. Not all at once, but bite by bite, breath by breath. Sophie finished 2 triangles, her first food in 14 days. She looked exhausted with her eyes red and swollen, but there was something different in them now, something that hadn't been there before. Life. She leaned against Emma and her small voice broke the silence. She said, Miss Emma. Emma said, yes, baby. Lily asked, can we have this every Sunday? Michael let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob and said, every single Sunday, sweetheart. I promise. Emma whispered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear, thank you, God. But even in that moment of breakthrough, something hung in the air, unspoken and unfinished. Because Lily had started eating, but no one yet understood why she had stopped in the first place. An hour later, Lily was tucked into her bed. Her eyes were heavy, exhausted from crying and eating and feeling everything she had kept locked away for so long. Emma sat in the chair beside her bed holding her small hand. Michael stood by the window with his back to them and his shoulders were shaking. The room was quiet except for Lily's breathing, then so soft it almost disappeared. Lily said, Miss Emma. Emma said, yes, baby. Lily asked, why did the doctors try to make me better when I didn't want to be better? The air went completely still. Michael turned from the window and Emma's heart stopped. Emma asked, what do you mean, sweetie? Lily's voice was small and honest the way only a child can be. She said, I wanted to go to Mommy. Emma couldn't breathe and Michael took a step closer, his voice breaking when he said, Sophie, what are you saying? Lily looked at him with those wide innocent eyes and said that Grandma said Mommy went to heaven, so she thought if she stopped eating she could go there too. The words hung in the air like broken glass. Michael made a sound like a hurt animal and pressed his hand to his mouth. Emma's eyes filled but her voice stayed steady when she said, oh, Lily. Lily whispered that she tried really hard. She said my tummy hurt and my head hurt and I got so tired, but I kept thinking if I just waited a little longer I'd see her again. Michael crossed the room and dropped to his knees beside the bed. He choked out the word baby. Lily asked, why didn't you tell me? Lily's lip trembled and she said, you were always sad, Daddy. You were always working. And when you came home you looked at me like I made you sadder. The words cut deeper than any knife could. Michael whispered no, no sweetheart, that's not. But Lily interrupted and said after Mommy died you stopped reading to me, you stopped tucking me in. You were here but you weren't really here. Her voice cracked when she said I thought maybe you didn't want me anymore. Michael pulled her into his arms with his whole body shaking. He said God no, baby no, I wanted you, I want you, I was just so scared. Lily asked scared of what? Michael said of losing you the way I lost her. His voice broke completely. He said so I worked, I stayed busy. I told myself if I could just provide everything you needed, the best doctors, the best care, I could keep you safe. But I didn't realize. He couldn't finish the sentence. Lily touched his wet cheek and said you left me alone, Daddy. Michael sobbed into her hair and said I know. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. Emma sat frozen with tears streaming down her face. This was why Lily stopped eating, not depression, not illness. A 3-year-old trying to solve her grief the only way that made sense to her. If Mommy's gone then I'll go too. Lily pulled back and looked at her father. She asked are you going to leave again? Michael gripped her hands and said never. I swear to you sweetheart, never again. Lily asked promise. Michael said I promise. Lily turned to Emma with eyes full of questions. She asked Miss Emma, do you think Mommy wants me in heaven with her? Emma's voice shook when she answered. She said no baby. I think your mama is watching you from heaven right now, and you know what she wants. Lily asked what? Emma said she wants you to stay here, to grow up, to laugh and play and eat Sunday grilled cheese. Emma leaned closer and said she wants you to live the biggest, most beautiful life you can because that's what mamas want for their babies. Lily's eyes filled again and she said but I miss her. Emma said I know. And you'll always miss her. But missing her and living your life, those two things can happen at the same time. Lily was quiet for a long moment, and then she looked at her father and asked Daddy, will you stay with me tonight? Michael's voice broke when he said every night sweetheart, starting now. But even as he held her, even as she closed her eyes and started to drift towards sleep, one question burned in the room. How close had they come to losing her? And what if Emma hadn't arrived when she did? Michael didn't leave Lily's room that night. He sat in the chair beside her bed watching her sleep, terrified that if he looked away she might disappear. Her breathing was soft and steady. Her hand rested on the blanket with her fingers slightly curled. She looked so small, too small to carry the weight she had been carrying. Around 3 o'clock in the morning Emma appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee. She didn't say anything. She just set it on the nightstand and turned to leave. Michael whispered wait. She stopped. He looked at her in the dim light from the hallway and asked how did you know? Emma asked know what? Michael said what she needed, what we all needed. Emma was quiet for a moment and then said I didn't know. I just remembered what it felt like to be that alone. Michael's voice cracked when he said I let her be alone. Emma said you were drowning too. Michael said that's not an excuse. He pressed his palms against his eyes and said she thought I didn't want her anymore. My own daughter thought I had given up on her. Emma sat down in the other chair and said you didn't give up, you just didn't know how to reach her. Michael said I should have known. His hands dropped, and he said I'm her father, I should have known. Emma said you were grieving too, you lost your wife, you were trying to survive. Michael said by abandoning my daughter. Emma said by protecting yourself the only way you knew how. Her voice was gentle when she said my grandma used to say grief makes us do strange things. We push away the people we love most because loving them hurts too much. Michael stared at Lily's sleeping face and said I almost lost her. Emma said but you didn't. Michael said because a stranger walked into my house and saw what I was too blind to see. Emma shook her head and said I'm not the one who saved her, you are. He looked at her confused. Emma said she didn't need me to feed her. She needed her father to come back, and tonight you did. Michael's throat closed up. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally Michael spoke and said when his wife died he told himself he had to be strong, had to keep everything together. He couldn't fall apart because Lily needed him. He paused and then said but I was falling apart. Every single day I just did it where she couldn't see. Emma said so she thought you had moved on. Michael said and she thought she had to do the same. His voice broke when he said or follow her mother. Emma reached over and squeezed his hand just once. She said you're here now. That's what matters. Michael looked down at their hands and said I don't know how to do this, how to be what she needs. Emma said you don't have to know, you just have to show up. He nodded slowly. Emma stood up to leave and Michael said her name. She turned around. He said thank you. His voice was thick when he said for not giving up on her, on us. Emma's eyes got wet, and she said that's not something you give up on. Family is family. She left him alone with his daughter and his thoughts. Downstairs Mrs. Rodriguez was already awake making breakfast even though the sun hadn't risen yet. She looked up when Emma came in and asked how is she. Emma said she's sleeping finally, Mrs. Rodriguez said. That poor baby. Her voice trembled when she said carrying that all alone. Emma said she's not alone anymore. Mrs. Rodriguez studied Emma's face and said you're going to stay, aren't you? Emma said if they'll have me. Mrs. Rodriguez said they need you, both of them. Emma looked out the window where the sky was just starting to get light, deep blue turning to gray. A new day coming. Emma said quietly that we all need each other. Upstairs Michael finally fell asleep in the chair with his hand resting near Lily's on the blanket, and for the first time in months either of them was alone in their grief. But morning would bring something new, something fragile, something that looked a lot like hope. 3 whole weeks passed and Lily ate every single meal, small portions at first and then more. The color came back to her cheeks, the light came back to her eyes. She started talking again, asking questions, telling stories, giggling at things that only 3-year-olds find funny. The big apartment that had felt like a tomb started to feel like a real home. Michael changed too. He stopped working 16-hour days and started coming home for dinner. Every night he read to Lily before bed, tucked her in, stayed until she fell asleep, and on Sundays they made grilled cheese together. That became their thing, their special ritual. Lily would stand on a step stool at the counter carefully spreading butter on bread while Emma guided her hand. Michael would handle the stove, flipping sandwiches like he had been doing it his whole life. They would eat at the kitchen table, not the fancy dining room they never used anymore, just the 3 of them laughing and talking about nothing important. Those were the mornings Lily lived for. One Sunday about a month after everything changed, Lily looked up from her plate and said, Miss Emma. Emma said, yeah, baby. Lily asked, can I ask you something? Emma said, anything. Lily's voice got quiet, and she asked, do you think my mommy and your mama are friends in heaven? Emma's chest got tight and she said, I think they're best friends. Lily smiled and said, good, then they're not lonely. Michael's eyes got wet but he smiled too. After breakfast they all bundled up and walked to the park a few blocks away. The air was cold but the sun was bright. Lily ran ahead to the swings with her laughter echoing across the whole playground. Michael and Emma walked slowly behind her. Michael said quietly that he didn't know how to thank her. Emma shook her head and said, you don't need to. Michael said, you gave me my daughter back. Emma said she was never gone, she was just waiting for you to come home. Michael stopped walking and looked at her. He said, you're not just Lily's helper anymore. You know that, right? Emma looked at him and said, I know. Michael said, your family. Emma's voice broke when she said family. They stood there for a moment watching Lily swing higher and higher with her joy filling the space between them. That night, after Lily was asleep, Michael found Emma in the kitchen. She was cleaning up and humming softly to herself. Michael said, Emma. She turned around. He said, I need to tell you something. Her heart sped up and she said, okay. He took a breath and said, these past few weeks, having you here, watching you with Lily, seeing how you've changed everything. He paused. Emma waited. He said, I've realized something. She asked what. He said, I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Michael said quickly that he wasn't asking for anything. He said, I just needed you to know. You've given Lily and me so much, more than I could ever. Emma interrupted and said, I love you too. Michael stopped and said, you do. Emma said, how could I not? Her voice shook when she said, you let yourself break so you could heal. You showed up for her. You became the father she needed. That's who I fell in love with. Michael crossed the room and kissed her. It was gentle and careful, and full of everything they had both been too afraid to say. When they pulled apart they were both crying and smiling at the same time. Emma whispered, what do we tell Lily? Michael looked toward the stairs and said the truth, that sometimes after loss, love finds a way back. Emma asked, do you think she'll understand? Michael said, I think she already knows. The next morning Lily came into the kitchen and found them making pancakes.